Good morning everybody and welcome to our webinar this morning. Hope you're all well. Just opening the doors to let everybody in, so I'll just give you a minute to get yourselves comfortable. Hope you've all got a drink this morning, water preferably. This morning's webinar is all about reopening your workspaces, so I'm guessing that we're being joined this morning by lots of people who are either thinking about going back to work or have just about gone back to work this week in this very bizarre world. It seems like it's been a long time since we've put proper work shoes on, doesn't it? And put up a shirt and tie and got out the door, but hopefully a lot of us are doing that at the moment. So we've got quite a few people attending so far. We had 201 people, actually no, 202 because somebody else has just registered at the last minute. So 202 people registered for the webinar this morning, which shows me this is one that everybody wants to listen to and be part of. And we know that because it was one that you asked for as well. So hopefully you're going to enjoy the next hour with Matt Trigg and Louise and myself. So we've got about 90 attendees coming through at the moment. I know a few people always come in and join us a little bit late. So we'll carry on and just welcome them as they come in. So let's think about going back to work and thinking about what that looks like. Some of you might be going back to places like this. It could be a warehouse, it might be front of house, greeting customers, and that's going to feel really strange at the moment. It might be that you're in a security role, and so guarding and dealing with people and maybe enforcing rules that people perhaps don't want to comply with, and that could be quite challenging at the moment for you. Or simply it could just be going back into an office and thinking about how do I navigate the office space and keep that kind of social distance that we're supposed to do. So it's challenging, I think, for lots of people in lots of different situations. We're going to try and explore some of those this morning. For us at Worthwhile Training, this is what our workspace normally looks like. We're either doing training sessions with lots of people. We use actors, so we get involved and up close and personal with conflict management training. And obviously that's quite difficult to do at the moment. Or we might be doing filming. And in fact, we've got 3 filming projects that are on hold at the moment for training videos because we can't get out there and film at the minute. So there's lots of things that we can't do, including actually holding our main event of the year, which normally looks a bit like this for Lone Worker Safety Live in October. So we've made the decision that we're going to put that to a new date. So just to let everybody know, if you're interested in Lone Worker Safety Live, it won't be happening on the 13th of October. Please don't turn up because we won't be there. But it will be happening on the 23rd of February 2021. So there'll be lots more details about that coming out as we go through the year. But just put the date in your diary for now. It might be a day out, a day trip out to London, the first one you've done for a while, perhaps. We'll see. So we're just about topping 100 people joining. So I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with knowing how all of this works. Some of you I know have joined our webinars before, and I can see people on there that we know quite well. Good morning, Alan. Anita, morning Chris and Colin, that's lovely to see. Mr. Bishop's online, that's good to see you, Mr. Bishop. Gary and Gina, Guy Osmond's there, that's lovely, morning Guy. Jackie's there, fantastic, it's a wave from Matt. And Jenny, lovely to see you, Jenny. And I could go on and on and on because there's a lot of people we know, but also welcoming lots of new people that perhaps this is the first time. So finding your way around the screen. If you're not used to Zoom, and I don't know who wouldn't be at the moment because it kind of feels like it's a new verb in our vocabulary, doesn't it? To Zoom now, and I'm all zoomed out, people keep saying to me. We're going to ask you this morning to use the Q&A section. So you should find somewhere around the outside of your screen something that says Q&A. If you can put your questions into there for us, there is a chat box as well, but we find it easier just to use the Q&As. And then what we'll do is I will pose those questions along with some of the ones that were sent in to us earlier. So thank you for sending in your questions ahead of time if you did. Or if you want to, you can actually voice those as well yourselves. So if you want to actually voice those to our panellists this morning, can you just put a note of that in your question, and I'll come to you later, turn your mic on and you can have a chat with our panellists. We're going to be polling you as the session goes on, just to let you know that those polls are anonymous. We want you to be open and honest with some of the questions, well, with all of the questions that we ask you. So we're doing those anonymously, so please feel free to kind of vote and let us know your views and opinions, and we will be recording. We're going to go on today till 12 o'clock, but if you do need to leave us for any reason, you can watch this again tomorrow or the following day, and it will go up on our YouTube channel, along with all of the other webinars that we've done so far. So, are we all ready to start? I'm going to ask you to raise your hands for me now if you can, just to make sure that we can all hear me, see me. Can you see my screens? Anybody's got any problems, stick that into the questions straight away. Fantastic. And we've already got a question come in, which I will save for Matt for a little bit later. Fantastic. Brilliant. So let's get started. Thinking about this subject matter, I thought, well, who can I go to and ask? And Matt Trigg and I have worked together for quite a long time now, and he really is, as far as I'm concerned, kind of a guru in terms of health and safety and all things risk management. And when I chatted to him, I found out that actually he'd been doing lots of work with government agencies and other departments and commercial organisations to look at how they could keep people safe, both during the lockdown but as they return to work. So I thought he was an ideal person. And then a lot of you on the line will know Louise as well. She is HSEQ Director at Siemens Mobility Limited, but has a vast number of years experience in lots of different organisations, and again is my go-to if I have really difficult questions. So they are the people that we're going to chat to today. I know Louise had trouble getting online, but hopefully she's with us now. I can see, yeah, Louise is up there, so that's great. Fantastic. So we thought it'd be useful just to kind of get a view from the audience to see where you are opening these workspaces and where you are bringing people back to. So to get you involved in the conversation, I'm just going to start off with our first poll this morning. Are you bringing people back to? So is it either a retail environment, warehouse depot, educational setting, remote working, maybe out and about in the community, or even doing home visits? Is it an office environment that they're coming back into, or are they on the railways or buses, taxis, or is it something else entirely? And in fact, that could be things like health, which I know a lot of you have been out there working and doing a sterling job so far already, but you may be bringing back into a health environment. Maybe you're a hairdresser, you know, a caregiver, coming back to work. So it'd just be interesting to have a look and see what people are doing this morning. So give that a minute just while people vote. At the moment, overwhelmingly, people are going back into an office environment. Of course, you might actually have people who are going into more than one of these, and you can actually vote more than one time on this setting this morning. So let's have a little look. Fantastic. Okay, you've had a minute, so let's share those results. There we go, folks. So, vast majority of people, 84%, are going back to an office environment. We've got a third of you, or just over a third of you, remote working out and about in the community. A few people in the warehouse depot. I'm interested in something else entirely. If you are going somewhere else entirely, maybe you could just type that into the question and answer box for us now, just to give us an idea of where it is that you're heading back to. That's 14 of you going somewhere else entirely, but we'll have a look at that as we go through. Fantastic. Good. Okay. So look, without further ado, that's kind of enough from me. I'm going to hand over straight to Matt Trigg, who's going to talk us through things that we've learned about COVID-19 planning. And I love this bit, and it always happens with Matt, including some weird stuff. So Matt, over to you for your weird stuff.
Hey Nicole, hey guys. Nice to see some of my Human Apps guys on the line today, and some of our clients as well. And welcome to the rest of you. Welcome to my shoffice, which was a hastily improvised office space, which has made my life easier for the last 10 weeks. So Human Applications have been working with some of our clients and with some other organisations who previously weren't clients and now are. And I wanted to share with you some of the experiences of managers, and particularly of teams who've been trying to help bring people back into the workplace. Nicole, if you can throw up the next slide for me. This is where I'm going hands-free here, right? First of all, this I'll say it's all about ergonomics. I would say that because I'm an ergonomist. But from your perspectives, I think what it really means is that if you've got a good handle right now on the jobs that your people do, the tasks they carry out, and particularly if you've got a task-based risk assessment system, this ought to be relatively straightforward for you, because all you're trying to do is work out how your people and your customers and your third parties can interact within the context of what you do right now. But it's been helpful as we've been plotting these things through to think about the sort of the journey to work, through work, out of work. And in particular, those of you safety practitioners will know that whilst we don't have any legal requirement to review people's travel to and from a normal place of work, what we know is that actually in many places, and particularly in the centres of cities, as an organisation, if you're bringing your people back, you need to be thinking about how they're going to get there, what the buses look like. I was working with somebody in Portsmouth the other day who was interested in what the hovercraft looks like from the Isle of Wight, and I'm told that they've been fantastic at managing their system. So I think you have to have a view about what that looks like. But the who are you users is not insignificant. There are small groups that we'll talk about a bit more later on who might otherwise be forgotten about. People like cleaners and maintenance people, and people who might sit around the periphery of what you do. Nicole, can I have the next slide, please? This is what it boils down to. I'm going to commend to you that if you're thinking about doing a COVID-19 risk assessment, really what you're doing is a workplace risk assessment or a work risk assessment that thinks about two particular routes of harm, one of which is the ingestion or inhalation of the virus, and the other of which is being close enough to other people. So your aims are make it easy to distance, either physically separate people or make it easy for them to distance, make it easy to maintain good hygiene. I have a particularly strong view about this. I should declare that in my teens I was a persistent nail biter, and then in 1989 I got two jobs, one crawling around crashed cars to investigate what happened in them, and then in the evenings working in a bar. And almost overnight I stopped putting my fingers in my mouth, and I would commend to you, if you have any nail biters in your office, that you do something to stop them from putting their fingers in their mouths, because they are definitely a high risk group the government hasn't identified. Then the last of all is make it easy to resolve concerns. We know that some of the concerns that people will have are real and some are less real, but they'll feel real to them. And in particular, what we have been suggesting to our clients is that not just you ask people, but you formally have a system so that people, before they come back to work and when they come back to work, find it very easy to just raise the simple concerns. Our expectation actually was that when people came back to work, there would be a rise in low-level complaints. In other words, concerns that Bob over there wasn't keeping his distance. Please, could you have a word with him? Now, it turns out it doesn't seem to have been the case in the places that we've worked in. That may be because the early returners have been consenting, that they are happy to come back to work, and the next groups might become more complicated. But I think you have to have a very, very definite system which allows people to tell you when they're not sure about something.
Matt, can I ask a question? We've had a question in actually, and it kind of links into what you were saying.
It's hard, by the way. There's loads of information happening around. Go on, tell me the question.
So the question was about this perception of risk. If people are concerned, do we have to include that kind of their perception of risk into our risk assessments? Does that somehow get reflected in there?
Well, I mean, again, these are things which typically, they're not just COVID-19, are they? It might be concern about perception of something else. So, a couple of things. First of all, in terms of the risk, the mechanical risk, one of the challenges that we struggle with as safety practitioners is there have been some conflicting ideas about how the disease is carried. So, for instance, an early concern was, what about air conditioning? And we're reliant on, I want to say the science, but I risk sounding like a government minister. We're reliant on the science to tell us that no, it isn't. The disease isn't carried in the same way that, for instance, Legionella is, in which it can be aerosoled and transferred through a building. And the evidence would seem to be, if it were, then before lockdown, I think we could have seen some extraordinary outbreaks in buildings with good aircon. So part of it is obviously managing what those concerns might be. From an organisational perspective, of course you have to manage the concerns of people coming back to work, because they're your people and their concerns are real. And those of us with long enough memories will remember back to giving pregnant workers lead aprons to be able to work in front of computer screens. You know, the fact that we can now look back on those days and giggle doesn't take away from the fact that actually, if you were pregnant and working hard to try and have a child, you want to take every precaution you possibly can. And there are going to be groups, particularly the clinically extremely vulnerable and the clinically vulnerable groups, who might be particularly concerned about coming back to work. And to some extent, there's two strands for us. One of which is there is clearly a whole piece of work for great managers and then for HR teams to make it easy for those people to have the dialogue, and almost every case will be different. And separately, for all of us, there's a little bit of reassurance. I'm not a big advocate of signs in offices which you're going to populate with the people who work in there normally saying, please wash your hands, because we know that signs aren't very effective. But actually, some yellow and black tape probably doesn't go amiss, because it just reminds you this organisation has done something. So
Linking
the short answer is do you have to manage that? Yes. And then the longer answer is some of it you can do by preference, some of it you can do only by dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of link into something else that you said, you mentioned in there about kind of vulnerable groups, and we know that the BAME groups are kind of more susceptible in one way or another to, you know, COVID-19, either susceptible to or having, you know, worse effects from it. Is that something that you think, again, should go into your health and safety risk assessments, or is that something more that HR should cover? And again, that's a question that's come in this morning.
Yeah, okay. A couple of things, Nicole. First of all, I might go over 10 minutes if I'm.
Oh, don't worry. Honestly, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really big one. If you're looking at risk assessment, is not just being a purist, but really importantly, the severity of the virus will vary amongst the population. There'll be some groups particularly exposed to that. But actually, as a risk assessor, you're really only managing likelihood. You're managing likelihood your people are going to become exposed to it. So if you're concerned about somebody who might be at risk, actually that's a marginal call, right? We know the list of those things has changed. We know that on, I think, midnight on Saturday, the government texted some people who'd been listed as extremely vulnerable and told them they were fine. So we know that thing's going to move. The story for us should continue to be, how do we stop our people coming into contact with it? Yeah. So as long as you're doing the likelihood part, theoretically, all should be fine. Now, I say that as a person who's not on the CEV list or CV list and doesn't live with anybody in that category. I suspect if you've been shielding for 12 weeks, you legitimately have a concern that you might be going from being incredibly isolated to now being invited back into a workplace where there will be other people, and it will be a higher likelihood of infection than you will have had in a room you can control yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. I'm sorry. I'll let you carry on.
No. Next slide, if we can have it, Nicole.
Absolutely.
The other way. The
other way. I should go the other way. That's better.
I think we have observed in particular a difficulty in separating these two different groups. If you're designing for public spaces, put down lots of signs, have lots of controls, make it difficult for people to get it wrong. And to some extent, you're managing then that perception of being safe. Some people won't care. If you're a rule follower like I am, I worry more about getting it wrong than anything else. So when I'm in a queue, I'm looking left and right to make sure I'm not too close to the person in front. So make it easy for people to be safe. For our staff, this is a peculiar one where we're seeing signs and reminders telling people who are in work areas all the time to be safe. And I think it's just give people a sense of control, give people a sense of self-determining. This is my sense of it. You might know your teams better and decide that actually your workforce needs constant reminders. In the early days, certainly we were hearing things like tannoy messages every hour, reminding people to keep social distancing. Whether or not that's sensible probably depends on what your group's like as a community. So the last one, protect people from arguing the toss. I think that's just about making life easier. It's, for instance, we in particular have looked at workstations where we've seen groups. The easy part really of repopulating an office is deciding where you sit. So the question then is, what do you do to tell people where to sit? And we're big fans of putting great big signs on the screens you shouldn't use, saying don't sit here. And the only reason for doing that is if you've been out anywhere in public, if you've been on a train or on a bus, and you're sitting nicely isolated, and a person comes onto the bus and is looking at the seat next to yours, you get that terrible creeping sense of unease that you might have to ask them not to sit there. It's no different from normal, right?
Yeah.
But in offices, just a nice way to avoid your staff having anxiety or having to referee for that person that might just plonk themselves down in the wrong place. And strange things happen. Earlier this week, yesterday I was writing a review for an organisation that only has 5 people coming back into an office, and they have the luxury of having 5 offices that they can put those people into. Separation is easy. My suspicion is, if you spent 12 weeks at home on your own, the last thing you want to do is travel all the way to work to sit in an office on your own. But actually, you might decide as a group, do you know what? I'd rather sit in opposite corners of the same office, because what's the point otherwise of having to Skype someone through an office wall? So I think there's lots of stuff. That's pretty. There's lots of stuff which you'll only find out when you bring your people back. And let's get them involved in the design. Let's make sure our teams are comfortable with what the systems look like. I have one more slide, I think, Nicole. well, I mean, one more slide with lots on it. The hardest things we've had to referee on have been toilets. If you're lucky enough to have single occupancy toilets with one door on the front, then easy peasy. If you've got rooms which have, if you've got a warehouse where the changing rooms or the locker rooms have multiple occupancy toilets with a single door going into them, it's incredibly difficult not to say, let's make it a one-person activity. Now that means that you have to, you have to take a ticket to go for a pee, and that gets really difficult. In practice, probably we'll wait and see what happens once people go back into buildings. I without any sense of joking, suggested that in many places whistling could make a return. If you want to know whether or not a toilet is currently in use, if the occupants are forced to whistle the whole time, then you'll know. And it really is that level of, it's just difficult. And really curiously, I wonder whether it might make a fundamental change for architects in how they design workspaces. I saw an office in South Wales last month, which had something like 15 urinals and stalls and a disabled loo, all of them from a single access point. And they decided that as a building that you could only have one person in there at a time. And it genuinely had driven an impact, in fact, elsewhere, of people just holding it in. Whether it was a sudden rise in bladder infections, but genuinely we had an organisation that said we fretted about toilets, and all that happened was people just drank less and didn't go to the loo. So goodness knows if that'll happen. So toilets a story. Invisibility of cleaners isn't really about cleaners, but it is about peripatetic activities where it's more difficult to distance. In an office, you can say to somebody, please don't come any nearer, or you can say to somebody, hey, would you mind next time you come past going somewhere else? If you are, say, a maintenance engineer, you've got a toolbox and a step ladder, typically in real life, people give you a bit of a wide berth. They know things might spray away from you or fall out of the roof. There are just some groups, and I think cleaners is the first one I noticed, who will be going about your building, doing what turns out now to be an absolutely critical job. And whilst your cleaner is walking down the stairs cleaning the handrail for you, people will breeze past them as if they're not there.
Yeah.
Now, I think you can resolve that with a little bit of discussion. You can maybe empower some of you might have cleaners who will have no problem telling people where to go if they get too close. But it might mean things like, for instance, changing your cleaning rotas, your strategies, isolating whole aisles so that people can do their job properly. So it's those kind of groups who otherwise might be forgotten about in the space. Risk, which one? That risk's not common sense. I'm in that way. Where's it on your screen? The bottom left one. The risk is not common sense. I had this discussion with my mother actually. She said, "Oh, it's just common sense." I think it's the exact opposite of common sense. It's the exact opposite of common sense. A bit like asbestos, or Legionella. We don't know. We want to know what is safe and what's not safe. So, for example, a month ago, we were still helping organisations to plan a perfect 2-metre separation, and that makes some workplaces really difficult to use. If you can have an up and a down staircase, that's fantastic. It's a really nice way to guarantee that. But almost every office has got a passageway or a pathway where you can't do that. Now we've changed, it seems, to as long as you're not standing there for more than 15 minutes, you can breeze past people. So that's changing. I see headlines of 2 of our newspapers today are reporting that 1 metre is perfectly safe. And I think what they mean is 1 metre allows more workplaces to open up sooner. It is somewhat less safe than 2 metres. And I don't know where that stops. So the risk isn't common sense. And 2 things, one of which is you have to keep your eye on government guidance. And the other of which is you have to listen to your people. So if your folks are saying to you, don't like it, do something. In particular, if you're looking to repopulate an office, this is where it matters, I think, is the easy part is to repopulate your office by every other desk or whatever arrangement you have. Then you exclude the ones where you can't sit because they're at the end of an aisle or they're in near the busiest cupboard. Then you come back to work and you knock out even more because they turn out to be hotspots. But actually the place where it's going to show up is when your staff have to queue for a pee, is when your staff have to queue for the lift, is when it takes 20 minutes to get out of the building for lunch because the stairs are congested. And so the risk isn't common sense, and it is tied in to some extent with consent to come back to work.
Yeah.
And the very last one is...
Before you go on to the last one, can I just ask you a couple of things? Because as you've been chatting, it's obviously been sparking thoughts in people. Firstly, there was a lovely comment from Karen who says that she's considering putting the lock on the entry door to the toilets. So, you know, you talked about that whole thing of, you know, having cubicles with locks on. Well, actually putting the lock on the main door, I suppose, and that would make it one person only. But like you say, it then creates problems with all sorts of other issues with people not hydrating properly during the workday.
Well, it does. You know, I absolute sympathy with that. I think when I think about our work team, if and when we can get back into our office, I see there's a question about if you can work at home. Has that now changed? As far as I know, the government advice is still, if your job can be done at home, you work at home. I might be wrong. How you fix stuff is a mixture of what you've got available to you, what's going to work, and what your group will put up with. So I think locks on toilets is fine. I had a discussion with a lady online last week when I posted something about if you've got staff, if you're worried your staff might be licking their fingers at work, you have a bigger problem than COVID-19. And she said my husband finds that wearing a mask stops him biting his fingers, which is brilliant. You know, it's whatever works for you. I did suggest a logical extension of that was boxing gloves. That also stops you licking your fingers, biting your fingers. But it's that, should I put a lock on the door? Answer, well, it'll do the job. Your staff might have a different view.
Yeah,
so I think in all of these things, the consent of your staff is a fairly important.
And I guess that's probably going to also be your answer then to Danny's question, because he's saying, Danny could be a girl, I'm sorry. Do face masks have a place in shared offices to minimise risk? And I guess that same thing is around, I guess it depends what you do in terms of a job, could be one thing. And of course, that is going to be problematic. We do an awful lot of now communication via this, you know, this Zoom virtual conferencing thing. When people go back to work, they're still going to have to do that rather than go out and meet clients. Well, if they're working in an office, are we suggesting that they do these Zoom meetings with a face mask on? Because communication is difficult enough when you've only got this kind of square to read people by. So do we sit in an office with a face mask on doing a Zoom meeting?
Yeah, again, we talk about the risk is not common sense. If you ask people who are wearing masks why they're wearing masks, there's a difference of opinion. We are thinking of masks, I think, outside of the strictly medical context, simply saying, sorry, I should stop reading the questions. It's very distracting. Simply saying, look, wear a mask to stop you projecting saliva at people.
Yeah.
Face covering to stop it. So if you're stopping it so you don't splat your own screen, good luck to you, that's fine.
But I was thinking about the fact that you've got people in the office with you, whereas, you know, now I can do this at home and not worry because it is only me here. But if I'm sat even at 2 meters from somebody, you know, I know some people get very excited when they're starting chatting on these communities. So, you know.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, you know, it's just that, isn't it? I'm happy not to wear one. If you're sat opposite a spitter, that's a different story. And when I think about the idea, you know, as an organisation, we do an awful lot of face-to-face training. When I think about that, and you're trying to project your voice, I know Louise used to be in a choir. I don't know whether she's still in choirs, but if you sing, you know, then you are actively projecting. So masks will have a place, and I think probably there are scientists who will know better than me whether they have a other function. And I think for all of our participants today, you know, it might also be part of an individual's comfort, you know, that they want to wear those things. So I hope we don't go down the line that seems to be in states where they've politicized wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. I think there are times where it's a really good idea.
Okay, so I'll let you go on to your last point. I'm sorry, Matt. It seemed timely.
Only that really, which is I noticed that the CIP, CPNI, the government folks who look after national infrastructure, had published a poster last week, which was all the things you'd expect, which is keep your distance, keep a good standard of hygiene, shout if there's a problem, with a fourth one, which was keep meetings virtual. And that's a challenge, clearly, as an organisation that provides training. I know yours is the same. Which is that organisations have stopped doing face-to-face training. I absolutely understand what that is. Clearly, I have a vested interest in getting back in a room with people. But right at the moment, the thing that's vexing us most of all is how do you replicate the things you get from group training that you can't do on Zoom, and you genuinely can't do on Zoom? The huddles, the whistleblowing, the asking the embarrassing question, how do you replicate those things in a virtual environment? And I know a lot of the human apps guys right now are spending their time trying to figure out how you do those things. So I can only hope we come back to having groups. It seems to me we're not built to be isolated this way, but that's my story. Sorry, that looks like 15 minutes now.
No, I think that, no, it's fine, it's fine. I mean, I think that point about training is quite an important one. In fact, we did have a question relating to provision of training, and I have to read it because it came in earlier. Training hands-on elements such as first aid, and I think really you've kind of answered that in a way that it just is very difficult. I mean, you know, when I think about the things that we do in terms of, you know, personal safety and conflict management, a lot of the learning happens in our training sessions when, you know, a group is out there doing an exercise and they're chatting amongst themselves and maybe I'm not listening to them, or one of them will come and have an aside with me. Well, you can't have an aside on a Zoom meeting. It's really difficult to do that. So I think there are real challenges, and especially in the assessment side of it. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day who works in the fire service and coming up to things like, you know, their breathing apparatus, their retraining for that. How do you test whether somebody is doing that well and correctly if you can't actually get in the room with them? And you might think, well, okay, surely they're all just wearing breathing equipment, but part of it is all about putting it on, taking it off, etc. So it's not that simple. And like you, Matt, I hope that we get to a place where actually we can get back into the room together at some point soon.
Yes. I have nothing else to add to that. I've pressed the wrong button, by the way. I've promised Mark Richards that I would answer his question live. I don't know. I meant to type an answer. Mark's saying there are also extra risks of going in and out of buildings with lifts and confined spaces, and have seen suggested rules of lift up and stairs down. But what if someone sneezed or coughed into the lift before I get into it? It's so hard to manage. And my answer is yes. It's so hard to manage.
Yeah.
You know, the one-way system with stairs is brilliant if your building supports it, because it's a way to make it easy for people to distance, to not have to have the argument. But if you're in a 16-story building or 20-story building with one lift and the lift is 2 people up, you had all sorts of problems, not least if you get in with, you know, Spitty Bob. It depends who you arrive at work with. So,
do you know what? We've all worked with him at some point, haven't we? We've all worked with him at some time. Okay, so thank you, Matt. I mean, there's some amazing sort of thoughts in there and some ideas and some suggestions coming through. And I always can tell the engagement of the group by the number of questions that come in. And like you, I was slightly distracted through some of the things that you were saying because there were so many questions coming in and comments coming in, but that's great. Just as an update in terms of the other, you know, we said at the very beginning, somewhere else entirely that people might be working. We've had theatres, museums, customer contact centres, going out and auditing, a real variety of things that people do. So, you know, it's challenging. You can't give advice for every single one of those situations, but hopefully some of the information you've given has been useful.
Just two things to offer. Sorry, Nicole. One is an answer to some questions about toilets and taking doors off toilets and locks on toilets and what have you, about contact points. Trust people to wash their hands.
Please don't take the toilet off.
No, genuinely, it's true. You know, if you work in a high infection control environment, like a surgery or someone who looks like that, you know, there are measures you'll take which none of us in an office environment would find tenable. The idea of washing hands in a fixed position at 8 foot. You know, I've seen styluses on offer for pressing buttons on photocopiers. Wash your damn hands. Don't lick your fingers. By all means, have hand sanitizer in your offices. They're all fine. And the second one is this, just about risk assessment, because I know we're going to come on to it, or some of the questions we've had previously about that. It is, the trick here is to go and review your risk assessments in the light of the requirement to distance and keep hygiene. Don't go writing endless risk assessments that talk about COVID-19 as if it's a novel thing.
Yeah, no, good point. And with your hashtag, try not to lick it, I'm going to leave that there, I think. Louise, I'm going to hand over to you. But as I do, I'm just going to go to one other poll for people. And actually, it links really well with what you were just asking there, Matt, in terms of risk assessments and getting people to think about this. The question is, how confident are you that you, sorry, I've lost the poll there for a second. You probably see it, I can't see it. How confident are you that your risk assessments have covered all the appropriate risks? And I guess that's thinking about, like you say, the business as usual risks, and then adding into it the COVID-19 issues, and whether you also kind of think about, other issues combined with things that we've talked about this morning in terms of vulnerable groups, etc. So let's just have a minute or two to allow people to do that. We've got a lot of people online. We've got about 112 people or so online actively. So it's going to take a minute or two for them to come through. But Lou, are you ready to chat to us?
Sure, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Welcome, Lou. Really lovely to see you this morning. So let's just end and share this. I don't think everybody got a chance to vote there, but just to give you a rough idea. That's good news, Matt, eh? Yeah, good. Thank you. Lou, you've been working with Siemens Mobility throughout this time, and I know there's some real lessons there that you've learned. We had a question actually that came in for you, which probably will start the conversation off, I think, and this was actually from Craig Swallow. And let me just read it exactly. He says, did Siemens have a pandemic stroke major crisis like this on your risk register? If so, do you think it made a difference? What measures do they take to make sure that you are best prepared for this? So that's a good question to start off, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we did. I think like most big businesses, the risk of a global pandemic was on our business risk register. And it was one of those ones down the bottom that you never quite get to when you do the review. You know, it's sort of there. Yeah. And everyone sort of acknowledges that it's a theoretical possibility. But all of a sudden, it became real. And I have to say, I've been incredibly impressed because the control measures we had in place was that we would stand up our crisis management process. And we did exactly that. About 2 weeks before lockdown, we stood up our crisis management process, and it has worked superbly well. We're lucky, I guess, because we had recently just reviewed the process. We'd rolled it out, we'd done training, we'd done some desktop exercises. Everyone was familiar. But it's worked incredibly well in its structure and its tone, and the way that it sets out the levels of interaction in the business. So we are still having gold team meetings every single morning, which is just the core mobility-wide leadership team, just half an hour. Right at the beginning, it was much longer, but we meet every morning still. Then every single business unit has a silver team meeting directly after, and every site has a bronze team meeting directly after that. And that rigorous process has kept us running right the way through. That's been the strength, really, just having that structure that allows us to make the decisions in real time and get those reflected back into the business, get the feedback from the business and feed that into the decision-making process. That's allowed us to continue to adapt. And as you say, we've been working all the way through. We didn't stop. So about 2 weeks before lockdown was announced, we decided that actually things were getting a little bit uncomfortable. And we asked everyone who could work from home to go and do so. So that's about 60% of our staff went to work from home. The first week, like for most people, I think was utter chaos. Yeah. As everybody tried to get to grips with video conferencing and remote access via VPN and everything. We'd always been set up to do it, but generally for about 10 to 15% of the workforce at any one time. So 60%, not just in the UK, but globally, was a big ask. So in that first week, there were 200,000 Siemens staff working remotely across the globe.
As opposed to how many normally would you have? How many would you normally have, Lou?
Well, we reckon that's probably about 60 to 70% of the total global staff. So I can't do the maths in my head. A lot less.
Okay.
It would normally be about 500 in the UK. On any one day, we would expect about 500, 750. And all of a sudden, we've got an awful lot more than that. Several thousand people out and working from home. IT were amazing. Big shout out for my IT colleagues. This is unusual. Anyone who knows IT normally, but they were absolutely amazing. They rolled out new tools. We've got a new VPN tool. We've got Teams, which we'd never had before. Within a week, we were all settled. But we were really focused then on all these people suddenly isolated, working from home. We did loads of stuff around mental well-being and physical activity and having effective Teams meetings, really focused. And there was this shout out from the staff that were on site, because 40% of our staff are still in our factories and our depots and out in our field service force, out on the road in public. And we had this big shout out from them that said, hey, hang on, it's all very well for you guys being worried about each other, shut up nice and safely at home, but what about us? We're still here. We're still out there with this virus, this hidden killer that you can't see. And it was a really poignant moment for us as a leadership team, because we thought, do you know what we focused on one of our populations and forgotten about another. So from that point on, we've been really focused on both, and the fact that the needs of each group of workers are very, very different. So we locked down sites, we stopped visitors, really got involved with the staff on the sites, and they designed their control systems. We knew what we needed to achieve in terms of social distancing and infection control, but we got out there with the guys and we worked with them, and we let them design systems that work for them. People have heard me say it before. I believe that everything you need to know to improve health and safety in your business is in your business. You just need a route to get it out. So we've worked really closely with the teams on site. They designed their shift variation, staggered start and finish, one-way systems, shifts patterns for lunches, all of that sort of thing. They designed with us, and everyone settled down. The people that were working at home settled into a routine. I think we'd all like to be able to build a little bit more time in between our teams meetings for maybe a sandwich or a comfort break, but everyone sort of settled in, and then the government changed the guidance again. We've been doing surveys all the way through. We've been doing pulse surveys once a week using Menti, and at the beginning we had an anxiety peak right up here. And it came down and down and down, and everything was pretty stable. People were pretty happy. Then guidance changes, whack, the anxiety peak goes right up again. But it's not about change. Human beings do not like change, but we actually adapt fairly well. So we'll adapt into new ways of working quite quickly. So now we're working again on two fronts, because we've got the people who are settled at home, who we now want to start to bring back into office environments. We've got the people who are in our factories and our depots, who we need to convince it's going to be safe to have more people on site again, because the offices are co-located with the factories. They're saying, oh, I don't want people back.
Oh, Louise, we've lost you there. I think we've just lost Louise there for a second. Oh,
sorry, I shouldn't flap my hands when I'm talking around the mute button.
I think we've got a bit of a problem with your sound already this morning, Lou. So I'm asking people just to kind of bear with us. I'm sorry, there's a few kind of pops and crackles coming in, but I know sometimes it's just literally to do with connections. But just asking people to bear with us on this one, and I will ask you to repeat if there's anything people have missed. So apologies for that.
I'm really sorry, our VPN goes to Germany and back, so everything's travelling a long way.
Excellent. Of course it does.
So we've got these populations we're balancing, and just trying to keep everybody engaged, really.
So Louise, there's a question from Lisa that's just come in, and actually it links into what was being said earlier on about the government guidance that says, if you can work from home, still do so. Then the question is, why is your company wanting to bring people back into the office? Is that just because of a logistics thing? Is it around productivity? What are your reasons for bringing people back in?
So generally we're leaving people at home, but we've identified that there are some people who are really struggling. And that might be because they need access to a particular server that, our designers, for example, handling really big files. It's unbearably slow working from home. So there's people that need access to particular equipment, that need to get on site for IT reasons. There's some stuff that needs to be done face-to-face with customers, and those people need to come back. But equally, there are some people that are really struggling at home, that just don't have the home environment that's suitable for home working, maybe in a house share, or maybe just somebody who's living on their own, working on their own, and now really struggling from a mental wellbeing point of view. So actually what we're doing is looking at people by exception. So the rule is that people stay at home, and we're looking at everyone by exception and looking at if they require to come back into the office, why that is. And then we're looking to accommodate them in the office. So it's not a general return to the office at the moment for us.
Right. I mean, that's good. Again, it kind of links into a question that was sent in before the webinar from Elizabeth. She works for a London Borough Council, and she was asking about, you know, is it discriminating against those people who maybe want to stay at home? You know, if people have disabilities, if they're caring for children, etc. But it seems that your plan has taken that into consideration. Would that be fair comment?
Yeah, I think you've got to consider people's individual requirements, particularly at the moment, because everything is very individual in terms of caring responsibilities and travel and work requirements.
Yeah.
But line managers are really key. Line managers know their people. So it's about empowering line managers to make good decisions and supporting them in doing that.
Mm. It's interesting because I know we've got a few clients that have started looking at longer term planning for home working with a view to cost saving on office space, and that's also kind of a question that's come in as well this morning. Is that something that Siemens are considering, or you know, is that not for you?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is an opportunity to take a wholesale look at your business and how it works and say, can we do this better?
Mm.
You know, there were lots of people, I think, particularly in our senior teams, who were a little bit sceptical about the whole concept of home working, but we've proved that it can work for the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
Some people absolutely love it. They're really enjoying having a bit more flexibility. Other people really hate it. They're isolated, they're frustrated, and they can't wait to get back. So we're now going through an exercise where we're appraising not just people's needs, but people's preferences.
Yeah.
So we can factor that into our decision making for the future.
That's good. That's good. Just thinking about, because obviously you've got people not just in office environments, but also in kind of production and in depots and places like that. Have there been any real issues for you in those environments getting people back into work?
No, I mean, the guys were amazing. They wanted to be at work because they saw the role that they were fulfilling as part of the fight against the virus.
Yeah.
But we allowed them control again. They designed their control systems. We did lock the depots down, so we didn't have people that weren't based there transiting in and out at the beginning. We do a bit more now, as things are in the virus coming out. But we did isolate the environment so that we didn't have people like me, just nomads, turning up.
Right.
So that they had some control. But actually the people that I think have been most anxious are our field service force. Right. So they're out there on the road maintaining traffic lights and control systems and things like that in environments that are completely out of their control. Yeah. Responding to faults, and again, it was about letting them design their control systems. So the guys have got high-vis vests with "I'm a key worker. Please maintain your distance and keep me safe" written on the back.
Cool. I like that. Yeah, that's a good
Which
idea.
might work for cleaners as well, Matt. They designed a barrier system themselves that had a double layer of barriers so that they felt secure. They designed their own signage right at the beginning. And it was all about giving them control, because if someone feels they've got a little bit of control over their systems, they're much more likely to adhere to them and have confidence in it.
Yeah, sure. In fact, we're talking in particular with people who've got customers coming into their work sites. And Nigel yesterday, my colleague Nigel, was running a webinar for a company that has high street non-retail shops. I'll tell you who they are. And one of the concerns is about the extent to which our staff have to referee the customers' distancing. And I noticed when my local train company, Siemens Railway, published their last piece of information, they said, by the way, it's not our staff's job to enforce distancing. Yeah. And I suspect that might be rather difficult, because actually if you separately want people in your premises or in your shop or in your library, and I've got those things, actually you are going to have to referee it, just in the same way. I know we've got a couple of people in libraries right now. You know, it has become your de facto job to go shh, whether you like it or not. And I think that clarity for people to know what is the limit of my control, what am I supposed to do, would really matter.
Yeah, I think that is, and in fact, we've come across that in the railways as well, Matt, that, you know, staff are being told one thing, but actually it's what the customers expect, isn't it? I would expect you, if it's a quiet carriage, to get people to stay quiet. If there's been social distancing marks, then it's your job to make sure that people do that. And I think that puts people in a very difficult situation. And I guess that'd be the same if you're working kind of in security roles, etc. as well. You, by default, are going to be the person that is going to have to enforce those rules. And people...
A site I was at on Thursday last week had suggested that the security staff would make visitors wash their hands on entry.
Oh, right. Okay.
I've no idea what that looks like. I mean, just don't ask your staff to do a thing that's impossible to do.
Yeah.
If you're inviting the public in, you know. I mean, and separately, we're talking about the public in now. So I hope we've answered some of the questions online that people have asked. You know, clearly there is a difference of opinion about the extent to which we go for any of these things. But for instance, the idea that if you've got visitors coming and sitting down in interviews, for instance, across from you, and I'm a fan of perspex screens. Otherwise, I should introduce you to Stan. He's my secretary for the day. If you've got people who are coming and sitting down at your desk, whether or not you have to wipe the chair down after the customer gets up and leaves, and it feels to me that if your customers need to take some responsibility for not sitting in a chair, touching the armrest, and then licking their forearms. I know that sounds exactly the sort of thing you'd expect me to say, but otherwise we're going to end up in a situation where we're trying to run hospital level infection controls, and we're never going to get back to normal. Interesting, yesterday actually, I listened into Nigel's webinar, and there were 30 or so managers who were thinking about how to bring their teams back. We prepped with the expectation it would all be around well-being, it would all be around how people would feel about bringing people in. And other than one question, which is a guy who said, I feel like I've developed agoraphobia. And I don't mean that in a throwaway. I mean, genuinely, he said, I feel differently about going out. All the questions were functional. All of them were, what about toilets? Who's cleaning this? Where do I stand? Should I wear a mask? What happens if a customer shouts at me or spits at me? How does it affect rota? Those sort of things. A couple of questions about security staff and cleaning staff in retail environments. And they're great questions. How do you vary those things? Big one about partnerships, by the way. Any of you who've got shared office spaces with other organisations, if you've got a building services management team, two big questions for you is one of which is, what are those people doing? And the second one is, in this downtime, if you're returning to a building, clearly there's a whole bunch of simple stuff you need to make sure has happened. So have your lifts been maintained? Has your aircon been blown through? Has your water system been treated? So in terms of the return as well, just those things. That was my extra things that came from questions that people had asked.
No, I mean it's interesting because actually one of the things that you said there linked into a question we had from Rebecca, who's a health and safety advisor for a council again. She said, you know, how do you suggest dealing with offenders that don't conform to the social distancing with your workspace? And I guess actually the answer is probably different if they're people that are working for you that don't conform to it, or if they're visitors and customers that don't conform to it. So I guess that's different in those situations. What, either of you jump in and answer that one, I don't mind.
Yeah, it depends on the nature of the relationship with your customer. You know, if you can exclude people who can't, then do. I think interesting cultural things will happen. So, for example, where you have appointments, we will probably end up being as hard on people who arrive 2 hours early as on the people who arrive 10 minutes late, because I don't want you cluttering up my reception area or turning up with with 4 or 5 family members. And that gets tough if you've got, I know there's a question there about face-to-face interviews. I know it's for another reason. It might be for job interviews was the question. But actually, there are some things, for instance, if you're interviewing somebody to establish whether they are who they say they are, or to make sure they're not vulnerable or they're not being coerced, Zoom gets tricky. So it doesn't allow you to do some of the things that are in there. So the question I think that to Louise about why are you bringing people back to the office, it is that I think there are more things that it is functionally easier to do when you're in the same space than we give credit for. So whilst we've successfully migrated to home work, I think probably we will slowly regroup those things that matter a whole bunch. For me, the thing I've missed most of all is ideas. I mean, I'm a bit of a pack animal anyway, but I love walking out of the office. I saw something in the street yesterday. I said, the thing I'm missing most is nobody's called me a really, really rude name.
I can help if you want, Matt.
Whereas in work, someone's going to say that's a stupid idea, or don't say that, or why don't you think about something else? And I don't know whether we're all just too precious about Zoom, but I think there's a really good reason to get back to being in the right place. But separate question is, government advice hasn't changed. We're still saying if you can work from home, you should work from home. And I'm with Louise that I think there are some can work from home doesn't mean you've got the technology. It means it's safe to work at home. It means it's meaningful to work from home. And as we've seen with Louise's line, you know, Zoom is pretty tricky if you've got snap, crackle, and pop on your line in there.
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean,
Nicole, just before we come to a close, it's a really big thing, which is we are doing this stuff. We specialise in helping people do the tricky thinking thing. So it's a purely shameless sales plug.
Absolutely, you're allowed.
If you're interested, human applications, you specialise in doing kind of weird risk stuff for people and providing that kind of assurance. So I'd love anybody from this from the conference to give us a shout and see whether or not we can do something with them.
Yeah, if people want to get in contact with you, obviously after this, you can find you via human applications, or you can also just give us a shout and we'll put you in contact with Matt, and that's not a problem at all. And I don't mind you having a shameless plug there at all, Matt. I was just going to link into one of the things that you said. Sometimes it's about what's the most appropriate. And I had a client call me the other day who said that she'd got to do some disciplinary, which potentially was going to end up with somebody being asked to leave the business. And she'd been told to do it over Zoom, well, in fact, over MS Teams or something. And she said, I don't know how I'm going to do that. I just don't know how I'm going to do it. I mean, Louise, your face then was a picture. I don't know if you want to comment on that and see if we can get through Snap, Crackle, Pop and see if you can comment on it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Just about.
Okay, so some things just have to be done face to face, and they can be, you know, either end of a meeting room table, 2 meters apart. We're setting out in our offices what the meeting room capacity is and the layout to be used, so that we can facilitate those face to face interactions when they need to happen.
Yeah.
So for interviewing, we're doing first interviews on Teams. We don't use Zoom. On Teams, but then we're doing second interviews face to face with social distancing at an appropriate location. So it can be done. It's about making sure that it's not your default option, that your default option is stay remote. And then if you can't stay remote, how do you make that interaction safe?
I think that's it. And I think the question is not just about kind of, you know, can we still do it? Is it actually the most effective, efficient, best for everybody? There's so many questions. And I think that's one of the things that's really come across this morning, that there's not just a simple, straightforward, you know, here's your list of 1 to 10 of how you solve it. Here's your list of 1 to 5 about why you should do it. That there are so many things that you have to consider. And that's, you know, risks both perceived and risks about COVID, but also the mental health and well-being things that we need to consider and balance with all of these things. So I think it's been really interesting. As always, we could go on and chat for another hour, but we promised people an hour, so we'll kind of stick to that.
I've three things, Nicole.
Go.
Number one, Tony Page, I should apologise to Tony, who said I have done a risk assessment about COVID-19. Thinking about it, it's a really good way to identify tasks that will have changed because of COVID. So forgive me, I wasn't saying don't do it.
No.
But if you haven't started, the trick is to go and review the ones you've got already. Is the first thing. Second thing is be careful what you wish for. A number of people have now called me rude names on the private chat. So I'm feeling better about this thing. Thank you, Guy, for asking those things. And the third one is record keeping. We have been clearly, this is not one size fits all, and it's not perfect first time. So you bring your people back, you walk them through what it looks like. You're constantly listening out for things that we might change. I'm sure Louise has got endless things that have been tweaked along the way, and the whole time just capture a record of the decisions that you made at that time. You know, it'd be stupid to deny the fact this might turn out to be litigation somewhere further forward. One last one. Ed Milne's asked, has the organisation started longer term planning for home working with a view to cost saving on office space? I think it's fair to say that if you've got a massive commercial lease on a property in the middle of town right now, you must be looking at it with one eye on, not reopening it. And I don't know what that means. I hope it means more business for Osmond Ergonomics, who we love.
So now you're putting shameless plugs for other people as well.
Shameless whoring for these things. What's the point of doing it if we can't blog some stuff?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Look, I just want to say thank you to both of you and to our audience for being so engaged this morning. We had lots of questions come through. I'm going to suggest that we have a quick look through afterwards, and if there's anything that we feel hasn't been answered, we'll get Louise or Matt just to ping you a quick email if that's okay with you two. Or you know, we can pick this up on another date. great. But thank you to both of you. I just want to remind everybody that our next webinar is about lone working after lockdown. So actually some of the things that Louise was saying about those people who are field workers going out and about. And in fact, I think it was Louise and I were chatting about just the simple issue of, especially when lockdown was really tight, if you've got people out and about in vans all day, where do they go to the loo when all the loos are shut down? But you know, it's all that kind of stuff that people who are lone working out and about perhaps want to be thinking about. So on the 18th of June, we're doing another webinar. It's being sponsored by Solo Protector, one of the leaders in lone working solutions. And we're going to be looking at a couple of case studies in there, and I'm going to be chatting through some things with my colleague Kristen as well. So thank you very much everybody for joining us this morning. It's been amazing. We didn't lose one person throughout the whole session. Actually we did, just one person, but they came back, so that was really great. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and have a great day. And in our traditional Zoom style, we'll say goodbye. Bye everybody, take care.